Wait! Before you buy a ThinkPad, here is my guide on buying a ThinkPad for 2024. In this video, I'll be covering about the T-Series. I've been very interested into ThinkPads ever since 2016, and I have learned so many models, models to avoid and models to recommend. And here are my recommendations. First of all, we'll be splitting it into two. First is the value category, which is basically getting a ThinkPad that you don't want to upgrade and you just want to use because they're durable and high quality. And we have the tinkering side, which is basically opening up the computer and changing, upgrading everything, doing all of that crazy stuff. That's what tinkering is. So, first of all, what ThinkPads should you avoid? So, for the value, I would say anything 20 series or older. Why? Because they are just simply too old. There are games in the 20 series that basically flat out don't work, like Genshin Impact. I tried on a T420, it doesn't want to run at all unless if you have the graphics card, but even then, please don't run Genshin Impact on that. You're gonna run it at like 480p. But on the T430, it works just fine, although keep your expectations low. Then we have the 50, 60, and 70 series. Why the 50, 60, and 70? Because they're not really that great. The 40 series, like the T440p, offer much more price to performance compared to the 50 and 60 series as well as the 70 series. Meanwhile, if you want something faster than all four options that I just mentioned, you could get the T480. Then we have the T14G4 and newer. Why? They're very expensive. Unless if you want to throw your money into a fire pit, I suggest buying a used ThinkPad instead, preferably a G3 or older. Then for the tinkering, we have the IBM line of ThinkPads. So anything that is 43 or older. Those are too old, good luck finding parts for that, and the price of them will very much skyrocket. Then we have the 40 series, except for the T440p and the T540p. Why? Because this is the time where they started to make upgradability not that upgradable anymore. Meaning, for the T440, T540, and basically anything like that, you can't really upgrade it. Except for the T440p and the T540p. Those still retain the upgradable CPUs. Then we have the S series of ThinkPads. So T430S, T440S, T480S. You can't really upgrade those. Those are very much limited to just RAM upgrades. Some of them won't even offer RAM upgrades. Then we have the 50, 60, and 70 series. Do not buy a 50, 60, or 70 series, especially if you are going to tinker with it. Mostly because for the 50 series' advantages over the T440s is basically the legacy trackpad. You know, those 3-button ones on the top. You could swap that into the T440p, the T540p, the T440. Basically, most of the 40 series, you could just implant a trackpad from the 50 series, making the 50 series for me kinda useless. For the 60 and 70 series, they don't really offer that much. Maybe the 70 series if you are looking to mod it with the ThinkPad 25 keyboard, which is their 25th anniversary ThinkPad, which had the classic keyboard. But you could also fit that into the T480, which I recommend much more for tinkering. Then we have the T14 Gen 1, in which I will explain later. Then, for the ThinkPads that I recommend, the T-Series ThinkPads that I recommend, for value, I recommend the T480 and the T580. Why? They're around the point where you can get them for about $200 to $300, and for Philippine money, that's about 10,000 to 15,000 pesos. That's a great deal for something that could run Windows 11 natively, still can play some games decently even with its integrated graphics, and is still upgradable. You can upgrade the storage in it, you can upgrade the, what do you call that? The RAM. Jeez, I forgot about RAM. Value wise, since you're not looking into that, it's still great. The battery life is much more better. Then we have the T14 Gen 2 and the T15 Gen 2 in AMD. Why AMD? Because Intel around this time is not really that great, so I recommend getting the AMD variants of these. Then, for tinkering, what I do recommend is, at the bare minimum, a T430. Why? Because with the T430, it's still usable day to day, and yet you could upgrade it. So it's like a win-win. Then we have the T530 for the exact same purpose, plus the ability to convert it into a W530, which means a beefier GPU, 32 gigabytes of RAM, basically just a super beefed up T530, which is amazing to think about. Then we have the T440p and the T540p. Where do I get started with the T440p? Let's see what I've upgraded with my personal T440p. I upgraded the motherboard, switching it to the 730 variant, also upgrading the CPU cooler, upgrading the RAM as well, and adding in a M.2 SSD. I think it's a M-SATA or M.2. Basically adding that one and upgrading the storage as well, upgrading the screen. And some people even add in dual fans into it. Dual fans. I don't know what they were smoking, but they added dual fans, and it's scary. It's very scary. Not to mention, you could add in the MacBook Pro's CPU into it with the Iris graphics, making it slightly better than the 730 if you can negate the power constraints and the thermal constraints. Then you have the T540p for the exact same reason. You can upgrade the snot out of it, add in 32 gigabytes of RAM if you switch it to the W540 version or the W541. They're basically the same thing. You could add in the trackpad, T450 trackpad, same thing that I did to the T440p. Better screen, I guess. Backlit keyboard if you don't have the backlit keyboard version. Basically, you could soup it up so much. That is what I really like about the 30 series and the 40 series. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention with the T430 and the T530, you could install the classic keyboard into them. Meaning, the 20 series is basically irrelevant if you swap in a classic keyboard onto the T430 and the T530. Trust me, it's worth it. Just make sure to do it correctly. Then, we have the T480 and the T580. T580 might have some bias, I'm sorry, but for the T480, you can add in the Thinkpad 25 keyboard and the chassis, I guess, meaning you could have a classic keyboard in the T480. Wow! Not only that, people have inserted 16 by 10 screens into it. You could basically add in a 2TB drive if you wanted to, a 2TB M.2 SSD if you want. You could swap out the full-sized M.2 SSD for a big boy laptop HDD. Basically, what can't you do on the T480 other than swapping the CPU? You can do a lot. I swapped the screen out on my T480. I added in a 24 watt-hour battery in the internal and a 72 watt-hour battery in the external, giving me about like 91 watt-hours. I fucking loved it. It lasts the whole day. Then we have the T490 and the T590. Don't take my word for it, but there is an option for the T490 and the T590 to have its motherboard swapped with the T14 Gen 1 and the T14 Gen 2. I've seen some reports of the T14 Gen 1 motherboard being compatible with the T490, and some have attempted to attach the T14 Gen 2's motherboard to the T490s with some success and some not very. So your mileage may vary on the T490 and the T590, but as it is, they're pretty decent laptops too. Though, for everything else that I haven't mentioned, there's still good options. As long as they're not in the avoid corner, they're all good. For example, the T4 T14 Gen 1 on the value side of things. Sure, they aren't recommended for me in the value, but if you can find one for a good price, snatch it. Same thing with the T490. If you can't, if you find it for a good value, yeah, snatch that boy. And with that, that is my guide for all of the T-series ThinkPads. I'll be covering other series as well, such as X, P, and possibly some of the more obscure series in the future. And with that, that's fuukattofumei signing out, and I will see all of you guys later. So have a good day, morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever. Uh-oh, I think I'm gonna explode.